Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Common Law. My name is Attorney Ed Berkman. Here at the Common Law, we like to discuss everyday legal issues and break them down into digestible little pieces so everybody can kind of understand them. The law is not just for lawyers, it's for everyone. Now, before we get into our discussion this evening, I would like to just remind everybody that although I am an attorney, I am not your attorney. Anything that you hear either myself or my guest say this evening, just please know that that is not in any way, shape, or form considered legal advice. Even if you feel as if this is exactly pertaining to your legal situation, I trust you, it is not. The devil is in the details with these sort of things, and although it might be similar, it is not 100% the same, and legal advice may change. So, if you do have a legal question, or if you have a question for the show, my email address is right here at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to send me an email. I'd be more than happy to help you. Now, I'm very excited to announce my guest this evening. He is a good friend of mine. His name is Dan Berry. Dan, why don't you introduce yourself to the folks at home?
How you doing? Nice to meet you all. For those that are watching, again, my name's Dan Berry. I've been in the trades right out of high school. I specialize in fire sprinkler protection, installing fire sprinklers. I'm a fire sprinkler contractor.
Great. And you have ties to both local fire departments, and you've lived on the North Shore your whole life, correct?
Yes, yep. My profession requires us to be hands-on with all the AHJs, which extend to your local fire marshals or inspectors, as well as your building inspectors and water department, so on and so forth. Yep.
Okay, great. And you used to be a firefighter, correct?
I was call firefighter for a bit in Ipswich, Mass. Yes,
Great.
yeah.
Great, yeah, Dan's a great guy. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about some construction laws, maybe what average homeowners need to know about fire prevention and sprinkler systems. So Dan, why don't you let me know on what is the, you do sprinkler systems, so is that required for every residential home, or is that more of a commercial thing, or sort of how does that work?
Well, so believe it or not, it is. It's not a requirement to have fire sprinklers in single-family homes in Massachusetts, and in most states across the country. However, there is a big push. There's a big group, the Home Fire Sprinkler Coalition, that is really advocating for home fire sprinklers. It's been proven to save lives up into the 90th percentile if you have a functioning fire sprinkler system in your home. And in my opinion, the cost to install these systems outweigh, or the cost to install them don't, what's the right word? They don't outweigh the benefits, right? The benefits of having a home fire sprinkler system, to protect and save lives is far more valuable.
So you mentioned that Massachusetts doesn't require that.
Yeah.
Does any of our neighboring states like New Hampshire do?
So now, let me dive into that a little deeper. So Massachusetts doesn't require home fire sprinklers, again, like other states, because what they do, the IBC, which is the International Building Code, and the Residential Code, believe it or not, requires fire sprinkler systems in single-family homes. But then what happens when the states adopt the additions, like Massachusetts, for instance, just adopted the 10th edition of the Building Code in January. They set forth state amendments to those building codes, which basically have the omissions, and one of the omissions in that state building code is the not requiring the home fire sprinklers. Now, what we're seeing, we do fire sprinklers in single-family homes in Massachusetts, and a lot of those are required at the local level. If a developer goes in and puts in a subdevelopment, part of the zoning, negotiations can be to install those sprinklers in the homes. If they're in remote areas, and the bylaws, at the local level, may say, you're X miles away from the fire department, per our local bylaws, you need to put sprinklers in your homes. Haverhill, for one, has quite a few homes with fire sprinklers for that reason. And then there's other requirements that might spark fire sprinklers in single-family homes, like if your driveway's over a certain distance. I think it's around 100 feet, something like that. If it's over a certain distance and it's under a certain width, like if it's not more than, if it's under 20 feet wide, for example. Don't quote me on that. It's right in that ballpark. No. But basically, their thought is we can't easily get our fire apparatus down there, so you're going to be required to sprinkle your home.
Is there any requirements of like being close to a fire hydrant come into play with that situation?
There are some requirements. Yep, exactly. If you're set too far off the road. I know we just did a development. We did a couple houses in Salem, Mass, and their options were to either extend a hydrant closer to the houses or sprinkle the homes. And because it was financially, for the developer, it made more sense just to sprinkle the homes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, if you were, I know Massachusetts has a lot more regulations than, say, New Hampshire. What are sort of some of the New Hampshire requirements?
So again, New Hampshire, I would say it's a lot more prevalent, fire sprinklers in single-family homes, especially in the newer builds. It's much more rural. And, a lot of the departments in New Hampshire might be volunteer. So I do believe it's a requirement at the local level, not so much the state. It's the towns that are going to require the home fire sprinklers.
Now, are there any sort of requirements for, like, say, multifamily houses or like condo buildings?
Yeah, so if we go to Massachusetts, right, if you have, 1 and 2 family homes in Massachusetts, for the most part, are exempt from fire sprinklers, aside from the local bylaws and zoning stipulations. Once you creep up over 3, yes, anything 3 and more in Massachusetts needs to be sprinkled. So triple deckers, right? Now, one thing unique to Massachusetts, which I believe is a benefit to developers and homeowners that might own a 3-family, Massachusetts has an amendment in the state building code that allows us to design a 3-family home under the NFPA 13D code or standard. And NFPA 13D standard is the standard for 1 and 2 family dwellings. And quick rundown on how our code works. We have essentially, the building code refers to NFPA, and NFPA are the standards we as sprinkler contractors follow to install our systems. And there's 3 basic standards that pertain to fire sprinkler installs. You have NFPA 13D, which is for 1 and 2 family dwellings. Now that is 13D is going to have the minimum standards you need to install a sprinkler system in your home. But that standard is also written to benefit the homeowners, right? That standard is written for life safety, not necessarily property preservation is a perk. And I would say, for the most part, if you have an activation in your single-family home, that sprinkler system's going to extinguish the fire enough to save your property. But that's not, it's written for life safety. It's written to allow enough time for the occupants to get out of the building.
Okay.
So then the next one would be 13R. 13R is also a residential code for residential dwelling units up to and including 4 stories in height. Now, in Massachusetts, that only applies to buildings that are 12,000 square feet or less. That's unique to Massachusetts as well. You go to New Hampshire, Rhode Island, you could have a 50,000 square foot building, and as long as it meets the requirements of 13R, you can use that code. But in Mass, you cannot exceed any building over 12,000 square feet, then has to fall under the NFPA 13 code. Now again, 13D and 13R, the NFPA 13D and 13R are standards that are written for life safety, more than property preservation. There's omissions in those codes that allow it to be a little more affordable to install these systems. Mm-hmm. Certain rooms, like closets under certain square footage, don't need to be sprinkled. Attic spaces on a D system don't need to be sprinkled, whether or not they're used for storage. Attics on a 13R, as long as they're not needed for storage, don't need fire protection extended through. Concealed combustible spaces don't necessarily need protection for those codes. Again, they're trying to write these standards to make it a little more cost-friendly for these systems to be installed and not be such a burden, more or less.
Gotcha.
And allow the systems to function in a fashion that, you know, you're still protecting lives.
Now, you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
So, since you started in sort of in your 20-year career, so do you see more places getting like required to have sprinklers like in the New England area?
It's certainly, you know, it's certainly it's at the forefront of construction now. It's
Okay.
You know, other than your small residential projects, you know, most commercial buildings you're putting sprinkler systems in, and that's usually one of the thresholds is the square footage. It's right around 7,000 square feet is what kicks in a sprinkler system. There are other things, you know, you could have a building that's under that 7,000, you know, like daycare facilities, certain nightclubs if they meet certain requirements, or restaurants with live music if they meet certain requirements that would spur sprinklers. But yes, it's, you know, fire sprinkler protection is very very prevalent. And again, those systems are installed under a much more stringent code too, the commercial, which would be NFPA 13.
Okay. Now, there's no requirement right now for existing single-family homes or multifamily homes or condominiums to install these systems. It's only for new construction right now?
So, not necessarily. So an existing home, I find it highly unlikely that you're going to be forced to put sprinklers in it, and even if you renovate, unless they already have sprinklers. Now, you move on to multi-unit dwellings, condos, apartment buildings. Yes, if an individual goes and he renovates a portion of that building, they will be required to put sprinklers in. There's a threshold, and honestly, I don't know if I'm interpreting this correctly, but usually the threshold has to do with the dollar amount you're renovating,
Okay.
right? So what I've heard is when you renovate over the threshold, you're going to, on residential that require sprinklers, they're going to make you put sprinklers in.
And I don't want to put you on the spot, and we can remind everybody at home, like, Dan here, although he is an expert in this, please do not take anything that he is saying verbatim.
Yeah.
That's not the nature of this conversation.
No, and if you are a developer, or you're buying a triple decker, as your first time home buyer, and you're going to renovate it, I just hire a good architect, and they're going to do a code review for you, and talk to your local building inspector, and that's really going to get you the information you need to make decisions. Yeah.
I think it's also probably pretty prevalent. Anybody buying a condo. Mm-hmm. Especially in an older building, like I know here in Mass, and then like in some of the cities like Portsmouth, New Hampshire, there are a lot of older buildings that are being condoized.
Yes.
That's not the right word, but older buildings are being converted to house condos, especially now with like the housing crisis.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of old buildings in like say Lowell, Lawrence, Portsmouth is another example of that. And I feel like you're buying that, although it might not have sprinkler system when you buy it, and you may not be required to.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean down the road in your ownership of that condo, there's not a renovation project that now triggers those sprinkler systems, and you would be on the hook, or the condo association would be on the hook, which usually gets passed on to those homeowners of that instance. Some sort of a special assessment.
Absolutely. One thing that almost always kicks in fire sprinklers is change of use, right? So you mentioned these commercial buildings being converted to residential. The minute you're going to make that conversion, now that I don't believe matters what your dollar amount of your renovation is. If you're changing use, that gives the AHJ all they need to say you're putting fire protection in this building, more or less, if it's required. So yeah.
Anything else? Your average daily homeowner, home buyer may want to. Something else to think about? Yeah,
so if you're going to buy a property that already has fire sprinklers in them, don't be afraid to ask for an inspection report. So any systems that fall under the 13R and 13 code are required to be inspected and tested per NFPA 25, which is the standard for inspecting and testing of water-based fire protection systems. So if you're going to purchase a new home or, multifamily that falls under that 13R, 13 code, you should request a current inspection report. Just to make sure the system's been maintained properly. In the state of Massachusetts, you're required to inspect and test fire sprinkler systems on an annual basis. NFPA 25 obviously has much more frequent inspections, depending on semi-annually, quarterly, some areas even weekly. But that stuff's more enforced by the insurance company.
Okay.
But yes, you want to ask for those inspection reports. Now, on a single-family home, if you have a fire sprinkler system, some AHJs will tell the homeowners that they need to get an inspection, or you could request an inspection. But one big thing I want to note about that, and this always gets misconstrued, is the 13D systems that are in 1 and 2 family codes fall outside of NFPA 25. So you actually, if you go to the standard itself, it will recommend certain annual inspections, but it's not necessarily a requirement.
Okay.
I highly advise maintaining your sprinkler system on an annual basis. It's not a lot of money, just to make sure,
Now, whether a property, whether it's commercial or residential,
Yeah.
Whether it's required or not required, if someone puts in one of these sprinkler systems, does that have any effect on what they pay for insurance?
I believe there's some insurance discounts. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. There's. Yep. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something at least probably ask your agent for information on if you might be able to, extend the safety of your home, further protect your family, and maybe even, mitigate the cost of it through insurance savings.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%. Yep.
And you work for a company called Excel, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And where are they out of?
We're out of Salem, New Hampshire.
Okay.
Yeah.
And although you work in Salem, New Hampshire, you seem like very experienced with the code, both in Massachusetts and obviously must be an expert in New Hampshire as well. Have you worked in any other states here in New England?
So we've worked in Maine and Rhode Island. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're licensed to work in Maine, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. New Hampshire does not have any licensing requirements.
And is there a union for the employees who are these sprinkler fitters?
There are open shop companies, which we're an open shop company, and there are some locals. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there for me, like an attorney, there's like bar associations, board of bar overseers, things like that.
Yep.
Do you have any sort of nationwide sort of organization that you can join to bounce ideas off of, or maybe there's some sort of a lobbyist group that helps push the interests of this organization nationwide?
Yeah, so there's a couple nonprofits, one of which is the AFSA, which is the American Fire Sprinkler Association. So they have local chapters. I'm actually the vice chair on the New England chapter. So they're big advocates for fire sprinklers. They're a great resource for sprinkler contractors, especially on the open shop side, although they'll cater to union shops and open shops. And then there's another association, I believe, as well, the NFSA, which is the National Fire Sprinkler Association.
Nice.
So both those associations really advocate for fire sprinklers and the industry itself. Yeah.
And do you work at all with local? You obviously work with the building code and building inspectors. Do you have any sort of work that ties into the local fire departments?
I mean, we deal with the fire departments, to plan reviews and inspect our installations. All our permitting in Massachusetts per the building code is supposed to go through the building department. With the fire departments typically heavily involved. The building inspectors are leaning on them for the inspections.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's some good exposure. I think I'd like to just take this moment just to thank all the firefighters out there for their service. I know as a former firefighter, it is a pretty thankless, dangerous job. So again, thank you for your service.
Absolutely.
On that as
No, I'm not doing it anymore, but God bless those that are.
well. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you work in New Hampshire. You live in Massachusetts?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Where do you live?
I live in Merrimack, Massachusetts.
All right. So when you're not working, Dan, what do you like to do outside of managing a sprinkler system company?
Chasing my children.
Oh, how many kids do you have?
I have 4 children, yes.
What are
four
their
kids.
names?
Yeah. Oh, my youngest is Max. And then my daughter Billy is my second youngest. Then I have Charlie, and my oldest son's name is Jack.
Well, we do air this on YouTube. I imagine they'll eventually watch this. I don't know if you want to. The camera's right there. I don't know if you want to say hi to them at all.
Hey kids, hope you're enjoying the show.
Alrighty.
Jack can't wait to be on.
Oh, I'd love to have Jack on.
right.
Yeah, we can absolutely have Jack on.
All right.
Well, Dan, I'd like to thank you for joining us today on the Common Law. You clearly are a wealth of information on these sprinkler systems and fire prevention, I would say, in general. Now, folks at home, if you have a question for Dan, or if you'd like to learn more about these sprinkler systems, please feel free to reach out. You're more than happy to reach out to me, and I can get your questions over to Dan as well. And we'll throw Dan's email address up on the screen here as well. So Dan, I'd like to thank you for coming on the Common Law.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, I'd like to remind everybody at home and everybody watching online that although I am an attorney, I'm not your attorney. So again, anything you heard here this evening, I know Dan talked a lot about the code. It is not considered legal advice. It is not considered building code advice. Anything you hear here, we're just having a simple conversation on it, and hopefully you found some of this entertaining and educational. If you do have a legal question or a building contracting question, please reach out to expert and talk about that specific issue with them. Do not just rely on what we talked about here. Again, I am more than happy to answer any of your questions. I'm sure Dan would as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time on the Common Law, where we will discuss another legal issue. Thanks, everybody. Good night.